If I asked you, what was the bloodiest battle of World War II, would you know how to give a clear and concise answer? Was it the most decisive battle of the Second World War, the same one that demanded the greatest number of casualties? These questions and many more are what we are going to solve throughout this program. Before starting, we need to clarify several concepts, which are going to be the parameters of the data that we are going to expose. And it is that when we talk about the bloodiest battle, we have two ways of seeing it. In the first place, we can only assess the number of total casualties, without taking into account the duration of the combats. On the other hand, we can cross the data of both the total casualties, as well as the days in which it took place. Although the first form that we have named is the one that is most often taken into account, in this program we are going to do it in the second way, which, without a doubt, will help us assess the intensity of the battle. Finally, and put another way, which battle would be bloodier for you, one that lasts a week and has 100,000 casualties, or one that lasts half a year and has 200,000? If you are of my opinion, it is clear that the one that has lasted a week. Next, let's briefly look at the data on total casualties, from the battles with the most deaths in the conflict, taking into account only the dead and wounded, and not the prisoners, taken mostly from the works of David Glantz. First of all, we have the Battle of Stalingrad, which with some 650,000 German and 1,400,000 Soviet casualties, gives us a total of just over 2 million. In second place, according to total figures and without taking into account its duration, we have the Battle of Moscow, which with 400,000 German casualties and 1 million Soviets, gives us a total of 1,400,000. Next, we have the Battle of the Kursk salient, which cost a total of 200,000 casualties for the Germans and 850,000 for the Soviets, making a count of 1,050,000. In fourth place, and already under a million, we have the Battle of Berlin. This confrontation in April 1945 had about 300,000 casualties for the Germans between dead and wounded, and 360,000 for the Soviets, making a total of 660,000. Fifth, we find the Battle of France in 1940, in which the Germans had 150,000 casualties and the Allies about 400,000, which gives us the figure of 550,000. Finally, and very closely, we have the famous Battle of Normandy, which, although it may seem otherwise, occupies the last place on the list. This battle that lasted from June 6, 1944 until the end of August, had a total balance of about 200,000 casualties for the Germans, and a little more for the Allies, making a total of about 425,000. As we said at the beginning, in none of these calculations have we taken prisoners into account, as we have focused only on dead and wounded. Once we see this data globally, the first thing that strikes us is that only one of these operations is a victory for Germany, this being the Battle of France. Everything else was defeat for them. Although during the first years of the conflict, Germany reaped a large number of victories, these were not characterized by the large number of casualties they had. This is because most resulted in large troop encirclements and mass surrenders, which we have not accounted for in this analysis. Let's now go on to redo our list, to see if the bloodiest battles, taking into account the duration and intensity they had, also correspond to this order that we have just seen. In third position we have a triple tie, with very similar total daily casualties. We have the Battle of France with 12,000 casualties a day, the Battle of Moscow with 11,600, and the Battle of Stalingrad itself with 10,000 casualties a day for 200 days. In my opinion, these three battles were very intense and, without a doubt, the outcome of the conflict greatly depended on their outcome. The only reason why both the battles of Moscow and Stalingrad do not top this ranking is because they took a long time, and they went through periods of greater and lesser activity. In second position, we have the Citadel Operation, which also joins the Soviet counteroffensives that came later and that concluded approximately on August 23, 1943. With a total duration of 49 days and 1,050,000 casualties, it gives us a figure of 21,400 casualties a day. This number doubles those of the third position, and helps us to understand the magnitude of this enormous battle. As we have analyzed in other in-depth programs, the fighting that took place in Kursk was of an intensity almost unknown to date, and in a few hundred kilometers, both sides put all the meat on the grill. The German leader himself sent the following message to his troops just before the start of the battle on July 5, 1943. "Soldiers, today we will deploy a great offensive whose result will be decisive for the future of the war. My soldiers, now you finally have better weapons than the enemy. The mother country looks at you with ardent confidence." To give one last piece of information about this battle that helps us imagine its magnitude, the Germans carried out a more powerful initial artillery attack than the one they carried out during the first days of Operation Barbarossa, and used a very similar number of tanks. And it is that, and as we have just seen, they knew that this was the great turning point on the Eastern Front, and this was demonstrated in the intensity of the battle. Finally, let's see the battle that occupies the number 1 position in our ranking, this being the bloodiest of the entire Second World War. Although the battles that we have placed in 3rd position had an average of 12,000 casualties per day, and the one that we have placed in 2nd place, an average of 21,000, the Battle of Berlin doubles this number again, standing at no less than in 41,000 casualties daily, during the 16 days that it lasted. As you know, these battles began with the Battle of the Silo Hills on April 16, 1945, and ended on May 2 with the surrender of the city. Whether in other programs that we have uploaded to the channel, and even in several live shows, we have analyzed the reason for this fierce battle that occurred right at the end of the contest, without any need. And it is that, although in the previous battles, there were many things at stake, by April 1945, with the Soviets in the Oder, and with the Western Allies also a few kilometers from Berlin, the war was more than won. The question we've always asked on those shows is why the Soviets didn't just surround the city and wait for the defenders to surrender. In this way, a good part of those more than 300,000 casualties they had would have been avoided. The answer to this question is varied. In the first place, it is always alluded to that Stalin wanted to take the city before his allies arrived. He also wanted to capture as much documentary and scientific material as possible, as well as to take important personalities of the German government prisoner. Another justification given is that they wanted to take the city before the famous date of May 1st, which had so much symbolism for the communist regime. Finally, another answer that is given is that after so many years of war, Stalin and his generals wanted all the glory of the conquest of Berlin, and that is why they were in such a hurry. Be that as it may, and by way of summary, we find that the Battle of Berlin is undoubtedly a faithful reflection of the combats that took place throughout the Eastern Front, having in it practically the same number of victims as in the rest of the operations of the Western Front, despite being a battle in which nothing was at stake. On the other hand, being the Battle of Stalingrad the battle that has been said as the most decisive, it was in turn the one that had the most victims globally. And you, what did you think? Do you agree with this list, in which we have seen the number of casualties in relation to the time the battle lasted? Have you been surprised that number 1 has been occupied by the Battle of Berlin, this being precisely the most unnecessary and the only one that could have been avoided? We say goodbye here. Many thanks to everyone, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.